Keep your money, son. Go be with your wife. Some things matter more than a man's last dollar. He had exactly $37 and one sunrise left before the bank took everything, and that's when the stranger's dying. Harley rolled into the dark. Ethan Walker didn't know that one act of kindness given to a man he'd never see again was about to summon 600 Hell's Angels to his front door before morning. If you believe a good man should never have to stand alone, subscribe right now and stay with me to the very end, because what happens next will break your heart and put it back together. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The foreclosure notice had been sitting on the workbench for 3 days, and Ethan Walker still couldn't bring himself to throw it away. He picked it up again. He always did, like a man pressing on a bruise just to make sure it was still there. The paper had gone soft at the corners from the oil on his hands, and the words at the top, "Final notice of seizure," had started to smudge. By 6 o'clock the next morning, the bank would own the garage, the land under it, the building his wife had painted the sign for with her own 2 hands 31 years ago. 40 years, he said out loud to no one. His voice cracked in the empty bay. 40 years, and it ends on a Tuesday. He set the notice down. He picked up a wrench. He set the wrench down. There was nothing left to fix in here that he hadn't already fixed twice over, just to keep his hands from shaking. He thought about Margaret. He thought about her every single day, but tonight she was loud in him, the way she got when something was ending. "You were always too soft, Ethan," she used to tell him, half scold and half in love with him for it. "You'd give a man the shirt off your back and then apologize for it being wrinkled." "Yeah, well," he murmured, "look where it got me, Maggie." He'd done the math 40 times. He'd done it that afternoon, sitting right where he was sitting now with a yellow legal pad and a pencil worn down to a nub. There was a box of parts in the corner. Alternators, 2 rebuilt carburetors, a near new set of pistons he'd been hoarding. If he sold every last piece in the morning fast and cheap to a buyer over in Yuma, he might scrape together enough to buy himself 30 more days. 30 days to find money he didn't have. 30 days to lose all over again. It wasn't a plan. It was a man drowning, reaching for the same wave that was holding him under. That's when he heard it. A motorcycle, out on the highway. The kind of highway nobody used anymore, not since the interstate went in 12 miles north and took every customer Ethan ever had along with it. He cocked his head. He knew that sound, knew it the way a doctor knows a bad cough. "That's not good," he said quietly. "That engine's dying." The bike was coughing, actually coughing, lurching the way a man does when he's run too far on a bad heart. It limped off the highway and into his lot headlight, swinging wild, and died right there on the gravel with a sound like a sigh. The rider half fell off it. Ethan came to the bay door, wiping his hands on a rag, and what he saw stopped him cold. The man couldn't have been 30, soaked through with sweat, white as paper. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely get the kickstand down, and when he turned around, his eyes were the eyes of a man who'd been crying and wouldn't admit it. "Please," the young man said. The word came out broken. "Please tell me you're open. Please tell me you can fix this." "Easy, son, easy now." Ethan came forward, hands up, palms out the way you'd approach a spooked horse. "I'm here. I'm right here. What's your name?" "Jake. Jake Morrison." He grabbed Ethan's forearm like he was falling off a cliff. "Sir, my wife, there was an accident on the Tenna truck. She was in the home, and I wasn't there. I wasn't there." His voice climbed and cracked and fell apart. "They airlifted her. She's at the trauma center in Phoenix. She's pregnant. She's 7 months pregnant, and she's in surgery, and I have to be there when she wakes up. I have to. Do you understand me? She can't wake up alone." Ethan understood. God help him. He understood it down to the bone. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Jake, let me look at the bike." It just started losing power. Outside Tucson, it started, and I kept pushing it, and it just... Jake pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "I can't lose this hour. I can't. The doctor said she might not. They don't know if..." "Don't." Ethan put a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, and he made his own voice into the steadiest thing in the desert. "Don't go down that road in your head. Not yet. You don't know what's at the end of it. Let me look." He crouched at the engine. He'd been crouching at engines for 40 years, and his knees screamed about it every time, but his hands still knew their business. They knew it before his brain caught up, and what his hands told him made his stomach drop. It wasn't a quick fix. It was never going to be a quick fix. The fuel system was shot. The bike had been ridden hard for hours with a problem that should have stopped a smart man 200 miles ago. But this wasn't a smart man. This was a terrified husband. And terror doesn't read a temperature gauge. How bad, Jake said. It wasn't a question. It was a man bracing for a punch. Ethan stood up slow. It's bad. I'm going to be honest with you because you don't have time for anything but honest. This isn't a 15-minute job. Your fuel system's torn up. I'm going to have to pull parts, real parts, the good kind, and put them in clean. How much? Jake's hand went to his back pocket. How much? I'll pay it out. He pulled out his wallet. He opened it. And Ethan watched the last of the color leave the boy's face as he counted. $37, Jake whispered. He looked up and the shame on his face was the worst thing Ethan had seen all night, worse than the notice on the workbench. I've got $37. My card's maxed from the down payment on the crib. I don't have. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. For a long moment, neither one of them said anything. The desert was dead quiet except for the tick of the cooling engine. And here's the thing, nobody in the world knew the thing, only Ethan knew standing there in the dark, the parts that motorcycle needed were the exact parts in the box in the corner. The carburetor, the fuel line, the pieces he'd planned to sell at dawn to buy himself 30 more days. The only thing he had left in the world that was worth a single dollar. If he put them in this bike, he had nothing to sell in the morning, nothing to slow the bank, nothing. The garage would be gone for sure. He looked at the box. He looked at the boy. You were always too soft, Ethan. Maggie, he said under his breath, so quiet Jake didn't hear it. Maggie, what do I do? But he already knew. He'd known the second he saw the kid fall off the bike. A man doesn't spend 40 years deciding who he is and then change his mind on the last night. Sit down over there, Ethan said. Jake blinked. What? There's a stool by the wall. Sit down before you fall down. And get your wife's surgeon on the phone, the floor nurse, whoever, get a number where somebody can tell you the second she's out. You're going to want to hear a voice. Ethan was already moving, already reaching into the box. And you're going to ride out of here the minute I'm done, you hear me? Not a minute after. I don't, sir. I told you I only have. I heard what you have. Ethan didn't look up. He was working now fast and clean, the way Margaret used to say he was when he forgot to be sad. Sit down, Jake. Jake sat. He sat because his legs gave out more than anything. And for the next 40 minutes, the only sounds in that garage were the click and turn of tools and the low murmur of a young man on the phone begging a nurse 100 miles away to please call him the second there was news. Ethan worked like he was 25 again. His hands didn't shake. Funny thing about it, they'd shook all night holding that foreclosure notice. And now with a real job in front of them, a job that mattered, they were as steady as the day he met his wife. Almost there, he said. She's going to run sweet, this old girl. Better than new. Why are you doing this? Jake's voice came out small from the corner. You don't know me. You don't know if I'll ever pay you back. I can't pay you back. Why? Ethan paused just for a second, his hand resting on the engine. Because somewhere out there is a woman about to wake up scared and alone, he said. And the only thing standing between her and that is a busted carburetor and an old man's pride. And son, his voice went rough, I buried my wife in a hospital just like the one you're racing to. I didn't get there in time to say what I needed to say. I've had 11 years to think about that drive. The garage went silent. So no, Ethan said, and went back to work. You're not paying me back. You're just going to get there. That's the whole bill. When it was done, the engine turned over on the first try and settled into a low, healthy growl. Ethan stepped back and listened to it the way other men listen to music. There she is, he said softly. There's my girl. Jake stood up. He had his wallet in his hand again, the pitiful $37 held out like an offering. Take it. Please, take all of it. Take the bike. Take. Ethan closed the boy's fingers back over the cash, gentle as anything. Keep your money, son, he said. Go be with your wife. Some things matter more than a man's last dollar. Jake stared at him. His jaw worked. Nothing came out. Go on, Ethan said. She's waiting. Ride safe. Ride smart. You're no good to her, wrapped around a guardrail. You hear me? And Jake Morrison did something then that Ethan didn't expect. He stepped forward and threw his arms around the old man, hard, like a son, hugs a father, and he said into his shoulder in a voice that came apart completely, I will never forget your name. As long as I live, I will never forget what you did tonight. It's Ethan, the old man said, patting his back. Ethan Walker, now go. Jake pulled away. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, swung onto the bike, and gunned it. The engine roared clean, strong, alive. He raised one hand without looking back, and then the Harley shot out onto the dark highway and was gone, the taillight shrinking down to a single red star and then to nothing at all. Ethan stood in the open bay and listened until he couldn't hear it anymore. Then the quiet came back, and with it came everything else. He walked back inside. He looked at the box in the corner, the empty box, now the parts gone riding north toward Phoenix in another man's machine. He looked at the foreclosure notice on the workbench. He'd just given away the last thing he had. He sat down heavy on the stool Jake had been sitting on, and he put his head in his oil-stained hands, and for the first time in 11 years, Ethan Walker let himself cry. Not from regret. He didn't regret it. He'd do it again 1,000 times. He cried because he was tired, and he was old, and he was alone, and tomorrow they were going to take Maggie's sign down off the front of the building and throw it in a dumpster like it never meant anything. "I'm sorry, Maggie," he whispered. "I tried. I swear to God I tried. I couldn't let that boy lose what I lost. I couldn't do it." And in the silence he could almost hear her, the way he always could when it mattered. "You did right, you old fool," she'd have said. "You always do right. That's why I married you." He laughed, wet and broken. "Lot of good it did us." He sat there a long time. Then, because there was nothing else to do, because there was no plan left and no parts left and no morning left, worth waking up for, Ethan Walker turned off the lights, locked the bay. He'd be losing in a few short hours, and went to the little cot in the back where he'd been sleeping ever since they shut off the power to the house. He lay down in the dark. He stared at the ceiling. Han had no idea on God's green earth that 100 miles north in a hospital waiting room, a young man named Jake Morrison had just been told his wife and his unborn daughter were both going to live. He had no idea that Jake, dizzy with relief and gratitude, and something close to holy fury at the unfairness of it all, was at that very moment pulling out his phone. I had no idea Jake was scrolling to a single name, a name that when spoken in certain rooms across 6 states made hard men go quiet. He had no idea that in about 90 seconds a phone was going to ring in the dark and a low gravel voice was going to listen to the whole story. The dying bike, the free repair, the old man who gave away his last dollar's worth of hope and then asked only one question. What's the old man's name? Ethan didn't know any of that. He just closed his eyes and he made his peace with losing everything, and he fell asleep believing with his whole heart that tomorrow was going to be the worst day of his life. He was wrong. It was going to be the best one. The phone rang in a house on the edge of Flagstaff at 11:47 at night, and Logan Carter was awake to hear it. I was always awake at that hour. Sleep in Logan Carter had reached an understanding years ago. It came when it came, and it didn't come often. So when the phone lit up on the nightstand, he had it in his hand before the second ring. He looked at the name on the screen, Jake. His jaw tightened. Jake didn't call this late. Jake didn't call late ever. The kid had a pregnant wife and a job and a life he was building, careful brick by brick, the way Logan had taught him. A call at midnight from a man like that meant one thing. Something had gone wrong. "Jake," Logan's voice was low and flat. "Talk to me." For a second there was nothing, just breathing, ragged, shaking breathing. "Jake," sharper now. Logan was already sitting up, already reaching for the jeans on the floor. "Where are you? Is it Sarah? Talk to me, son, right now." "She's alive." The words broke out of Jake like a dam giving way. "Logan, she's alive. The baby's alive. They both made it. They just told me she's gonna be okay." Logan closed his eyes. He let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for an hour. "Thank God," he said quietly. "Thank God, Jake. You hear me? She's gonna be fine." There was an accident. A truck on the 10. They airlifted her to Phoenix, and I was 3 hours away. I had to ride, and Logan, Jake's voice climbed again. "I almost didn't make it. My bike died. Out in the middle of nowhere, the engine just quit on me, and I had $37 to my name and a wife on an operating table 100 miles north, and I..." Slow down. There was this old man, and now Jake was crying. Logan could hear it. The kid wasn't even trying to hide it. There was this old man, Logan, a mechanic, out on the dead highway off the 10. I rolled in on a bike that was already gone, and I told him I had $37, and I begged him to fix it, and you know what he did? What did he do, Jake? He fixed it. He pulled real parts, good parts. I watched him do it 40 minutes of work, and at the end I held out the cash, and Jake's voice cracked clean in half. He closed my hand over it. He told me to keep my money. He said, go be with your wife, and some things matter more than a man's last dollar. And he sent me on my way. That bike is why I'm sitting in this waiting room. That old man is why I was holding Sarah's hand when she opened her eyes. Logan had gone very still. Logan, Jake said, you there, I'm here. There's more. Jake dragged in a breath. I got to talking to him while he worked. The man's losing everything. His garage, his land. The bank's foreclosing on him at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. He told me he didn't say it to make me feel bad. He wasn't asking me for a thing. But he said those parts he put in my bike were the last things he had to sell. He gave away the only chance he had to save his place. For a stranger. For me. Jake's voice dropped to almost nothing. He gave it all away tonight, Logan. And he's going to lose everything in the morning. And he doesn't even know I know. For a long moment, Logan Carter didn't say anything at all. I was sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark. One boot half on, and he was thinking about a lot of things at once. He was thinking about a road outside Barstow 26 years ago, when he was younger than Jake and twice as stupid and bleeding on the shoulder of a highway, and a stranger had stopped when nobody else would. He was thinking about what his old man used to say. The only good thing the old bastard ever taught him, you measure a man by what he does when there's nothing in it for him. He was thinking about how rare it was, how vanishingly, almost impossibly rare, to find a person in this world who did the right thing when the right thing cost him everything and got him nothing. And then he thought about the fact that one of those people was about to be erased. Quietly. In the dark. With a piece of paper and a banker's signature while the rest of the world slept. Not tonight, Jake, Logan said. Listen to me very careful. You did right calling me. You did exactly right. Now you stay there with Sarah. You don't move from that hospital, you hear me? You take care of your girls. That's your job tonight. You let me handle the rest. What's the old man's name? A pause. Ethan, Jake said. Ethan Walker. The garage is off the old highway, the frontage road south of the 10 past though. I'll find it. Logan was already standing. I can find anything in this state, son. You know that. Logan. Jake's voice was full of something now, hope, fear, he didn't know what. What are you gonna do? Logan Carter stood in the dark of his bedroom, and for the first time that night, something like a smile crossed his face. It was not a soft smile. I'm gonna go pay a man back, he said. Get some sleep, Jake. Kiss that baby for me when she gets here. He hung up. And then Logan Carter did what he had not done in years. He sat down at the little desk in the corner, the one with Maria's photo on it. Maria, 10 years gone, who used to tell him he had a soft heart underneath all the leather in the scars, and who he'd never once believed until she was dead. And he caught himself proving her right, and he opened his phone and he started making calls. The first call was to a man named Duke down in Tucson, who'd been Logan's road captain for 15 years, and who answered on one ring even at midnight, because that was the kind of man he was. Boss, Duke said, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Something's right for once. Logan leaned back. Listen close. There's an old man out on the dead frontage road south of the 10, mechanic. Name's Ethan Walker. Tonight he fixed Jake's bike for free, the parts that saved Jake's life when Sarah went under the knife. Gave the kid back his last $37 and sent him to the hospital. Turns out those parts were the only thing the old man had left to sell. The bank's taking his garage at 6 in the morning. The line was quiet. How many we talking, boss? Duke said. No hesitation, no questions, just how many? I want every brother who can ride to ride, Logan said. Tonight, right now, Tucson, Phoenix, Flagstaff. Call Reno, call Vegas, call the boys in Albuquerque, and the ones out in San Bernardino. I want this old man to wake up to a sight he will tell his grandkids about. And Duke, Logan's voice dropped, I want lawyers, I want money. I want somebody who knows how a foreclosure works and how to stop one cold. We're not just gonna show up and look mean. We're gonna fix this. The way he fixed Jake, you understand me? I understand you, Duke said. And Logan could hear it. The man was already moving, already pulling his boots on, already grinning into the dark. Boss, this is gonna be the best thing we ever did. Damn right it is. Ride safe. Don't kill yourselves getting there. He's not going anywhere till 6. Logan hung up. and then the night came alive. It started slow the way these things do. Duke called 4 men. Those 4 men called 6 each. Phones lit up across the high desert and down into the valleys, and the message moved from mouth to mouth, from chapter to chapter. The way the important things always traveled in their world, not by computer, not by some post on a screen, but person to person, brother to brother. The human chain that had held them together for 50 years. And the thing was, the message changed something in every man who heard it. A biker named Cole, 51 years old, 3 grandkids, was sitting in his kitchen in Mesa nursing a bad knee and worse memories when his phone rang. He listened. He set the phone down. He sat there for a second. Then he stood up, and his wife came in, rubbing her eyes, and said, "Cole, it's almost 1 in the morning. Where on earth do you think you're?" "There's an old man losing everything because he was kind to a stranger," Cole said, pulling his jacket off the hook. "I got a ride, baby. You'd want me to. You know you would." His wife looked at him a long second. Then she went and got his good gloves off the dresser, and she handed them to him, and she said, you go right now, and you tell that old man there's still good people in this world." A man named Tommy, 26, the youngest in his chapter, the one the older guys still called kid, got the call and didn't even understand all of it. But he understood enough. He understood an old man gave away everything for a stranger. He'd never met Ethan Walker. He'd never met Jake. But he found himself standing in his living room with his heart pounding, and he thought, this is what I joined for. Not the patches, not the rides, this. And he was on the highway 9 minutes later. A grizzled old-timer named Bear, 68, who'd buried more brothers than he could count, and who didn't ride much anymore, on account of his eyes weren't what they used to be. Bear got the call from his own son, and he didn't say a word for a moment, and his son said, "Pop, you don't gotta come. It's a long ride, and it's dark, and..." Boy Bear said, "I have been waiting my whole life to be part of something this good. You think a little dark is gonna stop me? Help me find my keys." And by one, then in 2s and 3s, then in 10s and 20s, the men of 6 states rolled out into the night. They came off ranches and out of suburbs, out of trailer parks, and off 10-acre spreads. Men who in the daylight were plumbers and welders and truck drivers and grandfathers. They left warm beds and left half-finished beers and left the television on, and they rode toward a garage most of them had never heard of to help a man not one of them had ever met. And not one of them, not a single one, was doing it for a motorcycle. They were doing it because the world tells you over and over in 1,000 small, cruel ways that kindness is for suckers, that the soft-hearted get eaten alive, that a man who gives away his last dollar is a fool who deserves what he gets. They'd all heard that their whole lives. Some of them had even believed it in their hardest years. And here tonight was the living proof that it was a lie. Here was a man who'd done the kindest thing imaginable on the worst night of his life, and they were going to make sure, by God, that this one time the kind man did not lose. This one time the story was going to end the way it should. Logan made the last of his calls a little after 1. Then he sat back in the dark and let the machine he'd set in motion run on its own the way it always did once you got it started. He picked up Maria's photo. He held it in his rough hands. "You always said it'd come back around," he told her quietly. "Every kind thing. You said it travels. I never believed you." He set the photo down gentle. "I'm starting to, Maria. God help me, I'm starting to." 100 miles south. The man at the center of all of it slept on his cot in the back of a garage he believed he had already lost. Ethan Walker did not stir. He did not dream. He had cried himself empty, and he had made his peace. And there is a deep, dreamless sleep that comes to a man who has nothing left to lose, and he had fallen all the way down into it. He did not hear the first rider cross the county line at 1:40 in the morning. He did not hear the second. He did not hear the call still pinging across the dark in Yuma and in Kingman and out past the Nevada line, where men were still pulling on their boots and kissing sleeping wives and rolling their bikes out of garages as quiet as they could so as not to wake the neighbors. He didn't know that, out in the black desert, converging on him from every direction of the compass, a thing was happening that almost never happens in this hard and tired world. I didn't know that 600 men were riding through the night to tell him he was not alone. He just slept, and the hours fell away one by one toward a sunrise he was dreading. 2 o'clock, the riders thickening on the highways, now headlights, strung out for miles like beads on a wire. 2:30, Duke on the phone with a foreclosure attorney He'd gotten out of bed, the lawyer wide awake now, and saying, "Send me what you've got on this Walker case. Something about this is moving way too fast, way too clean. Banks don't usually move this fast unless somebody wants them to." 2:45. A line of motorcycles forming up at a truck stop 10 miles out, 200 of them. 300 waiting for the rest engines, ticking in the cold. Men passing thermoses of coffee, hand to hand, and saying almost nothing because some things don't need saying. And in his cot, Ethan Walker rolled over in his sleep, and his lips moved, and the only word he said was his wife's name. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the first sound reached him. It came up out of his dreams like a tide far away. At first, a low rumble he folded into the dream and ignored. But it grew. It deepened. It became something the desert had not heard in 40 years. A sound like the earth itself clearing its throat. A sound that rattled the windows in their frames and shivered the tools on their pegboard and reached down into the back room and put a hand on the sleeping man's shoulder. Ethan's eyes opened in the dark. He lay still. He listened. His heart was suddenly hammering, though he didn't yet know why. The sound kept growing, closer, louder, impossibly loud now, a thunder with no storm behind it rolling in off the highway and filling up the whole world. He sat up on the cot. He put his bare feet on the cold concrete floor. "What in God's name?" he whispered. And Ethan Walker stood and he walked toward the front of the garage, toward the windows, toward that growing roar with absolutely no idea on this earth of what he was about to see. He pushed open the bay door and the sound hit him like a physical thing. Headlights. That was the first thing his mind could hold on to, headlights more than he could count strung out along the dead highway and pouring off it into his lot in a river of white light. For one wild second, the old man thought he was still asleep, thought this was a dream or the start of one, thought maybe he'd died in the night and this was whatever came after. Then the cold desert air hit his face and he knew he was awake and he had no earthly idea what he was looking at. "What is this?" he said. Nobody heard him over the engines. "What in the world is this?" They kept coming. That was the thing his brain couldn't catch up to. Just when he thought it had to be the end of them, that the last bike had rolled in, 10 more crested the rise on the highway, then 20, then a wave of them headlights swinging into his lot one after another, until the gravel was full, and they were lining up along the frontage road until the whole dead stretch of highway that hadn't seen 10 cars in a day for 40 years was alive, packed shoulder to shoulder with chrome and leather and rumbling steel as far as he could see in the dark. Ethan Walker had never been afraid of much in his life, but his hands were shaking now and his heart was going so hard he could feel it in his throat, and he gripped the door frame to keep his legs under him. One by one, the engines began to shut off. It happened in a wave rolling back from the front of the lot toward the highway, first a few, then dozens. Then all of them, the great thunder dying down and down, until the silence that came after was almost as loud as the noise had been. 500 men, 600, standing by their bikes in the dark, not moving, not speaking, just looking at him. And Ethan Walker stood alone in the door of his garage in a sweat-stained undershirt, 63 years old, with a foreclosure notice on the workbench behind him. And he had never in his life felt smaller or more confused or more afraid that this was some terrible mistake that was about to come down on his head. "I think," his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again louder. "I think you boys got the wrong place. There's nothing here. There's nothing here worth—" A man was walking toward him. He came up through the crowd, and the men parted for him without being asked, and Ethan understood right away that this was someone they followed. He was big, broad through the shoulders, gray in his beard, and he walked with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once in his life had to wonder whether he was allowed to be somewhere. He stopped a few feet from the door. For a moment, the two old men just looked at each other. "Ethan Walker," the big man said. Ethan's mouth was dry. "That's me. Mister, if this is about money I owe, I don't have any. I got nothing. They were taking the place at 6. There's nothing here for you." The big man's face did something then. Something moved through it, and to Ethan's astonishment, the man's eyes went bright and wet in the headlights. "My name is Logan Carter," he said, "and we're not here to take anything from you, Mr. Walker." His voice was rough and it caught. "We're here because of what you did tonight." Ethan stared at him. A young man rolled in here a few hours ago on a dying Harley. Wife in surgery up in Phoenix, pregnant, $37 in his pocket. Logan's jaw worked. "You remember him?" The breath went out of Ethan all at once. "Jake," he whispered. Did something happen? Did the boy?" He made it. Logan's voice broke open. He made it because of you. He was holding his wife's hand when she woke up. She's alive. The baby's alive. A little girl gonna come into this world in a couple months, and she's gonna have a daddy there to hold her because some old man out on a dead highway gave away the last thing he had to a stranger he'll never see again. Ethan's eyes were burning. He didn't trust himself to speak. That boy is family to me, Mr. Walker, Logan said. I raised him up in this life. He called me at midnight crying so hard I could barely understand him, and you know what he was crying about, not the accident. His wife was safe by then. He was crying about you, about a good man who was going to lose everything in the morning for the crime of being kind to somebody when it cost him everything to do it. Logan took a step closer. He told me your bank's coming at 6. He told me what those parts were, what they were supposed to be for. Ethan's voice was gone. He tried again. It was just a repair. Anybody would have. No, Logan said it flat and hard and final, and the word cut through the night. No, Mr. Walker, anybody would not have. That's the whole thing. That's the whole entire thing. I have spent 58 years on this earth, and I have watched 1,000 men do the easy, cruel thing when the hard, kind thing was right in front of them. Anybody would have taken the boy's $37. Anybody would have said, sorry, son, can't help you cash up front. Anybody would have looked at their own foreclosure notice and decided that tonight, just this once, somebody else's emergency wasn't their problem. His voice shook with something that was half grief and half fury. You didn't. You looked at a stranger drowning and you handed him the only life raft you had left, knowing it'd sink you. That's not anybody. That's about one man in 10,000. And we rode all night to stand in your parking lot and tell you so. And then Logan Carter, leader of 600 men, reached out and took Ethan Walker's grease-stained hand in both of his, and he gripped it hard. You helped one of ours, Logan said. Now we're going to help one of ours. You understand me, Ethan? You're one of ours now, as of tonight, and we do not let our people stand alone. Something broke loose in the old man's chest. It came up out of him before he could stop it, a sound he hadn't made since the day they put Margaret in the ground. A single hard sob that doubled him forward, and Logan caught his shoulder and held him up, and behind Logan, 600 men stood in the dark and watched an old mechanic weep in his own doorway. And not one of them looked away because not one of them thought there was anything in the world to be ashamed of in it. Ethan got out. I don't understand any of this. You don't know me. You rode all night for me. I'm nobody. I'm just an old man with you're not nobody. A new voice, younger. It was Tommy. The kid pushed up near the front, and his eyes were red too. Sir, I'm 26 years old, and I never met you in my life, and I rode 3 hours in the cold to get here, and I'd do it again tomorrow. You're not nobody. Don't you say that. You're not nobody, said Cole, the man from Mesa 51, and stone-faced and crying anyway. You're not nobody, rumbled old Bear 68, leaning on his son's arm. And then it moved through the crowd like fire through dry grass, man after man, voice after voice, until 600 men were saying it into the dark, rough and broken, and absolutely sure you're not nobody. You're not nobody. You're not nobody. And Ethan Walker stood in the middle of it and shook and wept, and could not for the life of him understand what he had done to deserve it. But Logan wasn't finished. He let the old man cry. He waited it out, patient, his hand never leaving Ethan's shoulder. And when Ethan had got himself something close to steady, Logan said quieter now, just to him, now listen, we didn't ride out here just to make you cry and pat you on the back and ride home, Ethan. We came to work. You got a foreclosure coming in 3 hours. We're gonna stop it. You can't stop it. Ethan shook his head, wiping his face with the back of his arm. I tried everything. There's no money. There's 600 of us. Logan turned and raised his voice, and it carried over the whole crowd. Brothers! 600 men went still. You know why we're here, Logan called out. You know the man. Now let's get to work. We got till 6 o'clock, and we got a lot of ground to cover. You know your Baz. Move. And the lot exploded into motion. It was the strangest, most beautiful thing Ethan Walker had ever seen. These men, these enormous, leather-clad, fearsome-looking men, scattered across his dying property like they'd been doing it all their lives, and they fell on the place not like a mob, but like a crew that had been waiting 40 years for the work order. A dozen of them swarmed the building's sagging front and started tearing off the rotted trim. Others hauled toolboxes off their bikes. They'd brought tools he realized they'd packed for this in the middle of the night, and went after the broken equipment in the bays. A crew of them had buckets and rollers and paint. Where in God's name had they gotten paint at 3 in the morning, and they were taping off windows and stirring cans by the light of 100 headlamps angled in to light the work. Wait. Ethan turned in a circle, overwhelmed. You can't. The lift in Bay 2's been broke for 2 years. I can't afford the... It's not broke anymore, called a man on his back under the lift, and there was a clunk and a hiss, and the thing rose smooth and clean for the first time in 2 years. The man rolled out from under it, grinning. Solenoid was shot, had a spare. You're welcome, old-timer. The sign, Ethan said, and his voice cracked again. My wife painted that sign. Please don't, whatever you do, please don't touch a woman's voice. There were women here, too. He saw now riders and wives, and a couple of the brothers' grown daughters answered him gentle. We're not painting over it, honey. We're cleaning it up. Look. And he looked, and two of them were up on a ladder with soft cloths working 40 years of dust and sun grime off Margaret's hand-lettered sign, as careful as if it were a holy thing, and the colors were coming back under their hands. The colors he hadn't seen true since the year she died, and Ethan had to sit down on an overturned crate because his legs wouldn't hold him. A man crouched down next to him. Duke, he had a thermos, and he poured a cup and pressed it into the old man's hands. Drink that. You look like you're about to fall over. Why? Ethan said. It was the only word he had left. Why all this? I fixed one bike. Duke looked out over the lot, over the dozens of men working in the dark, the sparks and the paint, and the hammering and the low rumble of talk, and even somewhere somebody laughing. You ever throw a rock in a pond, Ethan, Duke said. You see how the ring goes out and out, bigger and bigger, way farther than the rock ever could have gone on its own. He took a sip from his own cup. You threw a rock tonight. You weren't even trying to. You just did a kind thing because it was the kind thing to do. And here's 600 of us, that's the ring. We're how far it went. He shrugged. That's all this is. You started it. We're just carrying it. And while the old man sat there with that settling into him, a few of the men were doing other work, quieter work. Off to the side, near a row of bikes, Logan stood with 3 men in jackets that didn't quite fit the rest. A foreclosure attorney named Reyes, who'd driven up from Tucson, a forensic accountant, who rode with the Phoenix chapter on weekends and crunched numbers for a living the rest of the time, and a retired sheriff's investigator named Hollis, who'd hung up his badge, but never quite hung up the instinct. They had laptops open on a bike seat, and they had been talking low and fast for 20 minutes, and the looks on their faces had been getting darker the whole time. Logan walked over to Ethan and crouched in front of him. Ethan, I need you to think. When this foreclosure start? How fast did it move? Ethan frowned. Fast. That's the thing that never sat right. I missed a couple payments last winter when business dried up. Sure, but I'd missed payments before and always caught up. This time they wouldn't take my money. I tried to pay. They wouldn't restructure, wouldn't talk, wouldn't do anything but push it forward faster than I ever heard of a bank moving. 3 months start to finish. My buddy down the road took him 2 years to foreclose on him. Me, it was like somebody had their thumb on it. Logan's face went very still. Somebody did, said Reyes, the lawyer coming over with the laptop. Mr. Walker, I've been looking at your file for the last half hour, and I need to tell you something. There's nothing normal about this foreclosure. The valuations are wrong. Your land's been appraised at a fraction of what it's worth, and the appraisal was ordered by the bank, not an independent party. The payment refusals are documented. You tried to pay 6 separate times, and they bounced you every time. And the loan officer pushing it through, he turned the laptop around. Same name shows up on 11 other foreclosures in the last 18 months. All elderly owners, all small businesses on land that happens to sit right in the path of a highway expansion. Hollis, the old investigator, leaned in. Every single one of those properties Mr. Walker got bought up within 90 days of seizure by the same company, a land acquisition outfit. And that company has got one address and one cluster of officers, and we're still untangling it. But I've been doing this a long time, and I can already smell it. His jaw tightened. You weren't behind on your luck, son. You were picked. Somebody sat in an office and went down a list and put your name on it because your land was worth money to somebody, and you were old and alone and easy to push over. Ethan Walker sat on his crate in the middle of his resurrected garage, 600 strangers working through the night all around him to save a life they'd never met until tonight, and he felt the whole world tilt under him. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the economy. It wasn't God turning his back or Margaret's sign coming down at last, because all good things end. Someone had done this. Someone had looked at his 40 years, his land, his wife's sign, his whole life, and decided it was a number on a spreadsheet they could erase for profit. Someone had tried to take everything he had, not because they had to, but because they wanted it, and figured no one would ever stand up for an old man on a dead highway. Something hardened in the old mechanic's chest, right next to the grief, right next to the gratitude. He stood up off the crate. "This banker," he said, and his voice didn't shake anymore. "This man who's coming at 6. He thinks he's gonna walk in here and find an empty building and an old fool who gave up." Logan looked at him, and slow across the big man's face came that smile again, the one that wasn't soft at all. "That's exactly what he thinks," Logan said. Ethan looked around at the new paint drying at the lift, running at Margaret's sign glowing clean for the first time in a decade, at 600 men and women who had ridden through the night for him, at the lawyers and the accountant and the old investigator with the corruption laid out on a laptop screen. And for the first time in a long, long time, the old man's eyes weren't wet with grief. "Well," Ethan Walker said quietly, "then let's give him a real different morning than the one he's expecting." Out on the highway, the first thin gray line of dawn began to show along the edge of the world. And somewhere south of there, not knowing a thing about any of it, a man in a pressed suit was getting into his car to drive out and seize a garage. His name was Marcus Delaney, and he had foreclosed on 43 people in his career, and he had never once felt a thing about a single one of them. He drove out the old frontage road a little after 8:30, coffee in the cup holder. Radio load the seizure paperwork in a leather folder on the passenger seat. He liked this part of the job, if he was honest. He liked the quiet of it. You drove out, you posted the notice, you changed the locks, and some old fool's whole life became a line item that closed out clean. By lunch, he'd be back in the city. By the end of the week, the land would be transferred to the holding company, and the bonus would hit his account, and that was that. He'd done his homework on this one. Walker Ethan, 63, widower, estranged from his only son. No lawyer on record, no family in the area, no fight in him. The man had tried to pay a few times early on weak little gestures, and Delaney had made sure each one got bounced. And then the old man had gone quiet the way they all eventually went quiet. They always gave up at the end. That was the part Delaney counted on. By the time you showed up to take it, they were already gone inside. They just stood there and let it happen. He came over the last rise, expecting an empty lot in a dark building. He stood on the brakes so hard the coffee went everywhere. The road ahead was full. Motorcycles, hundreds of them, lined up along both shoulders for what had to be a quarter mile. And the lot he'd been picturing empty, was packed. People everywhere. And the building itself, the sagging dead building from the file photos, was not sagging and was not dead. It was freshly painted. The bays were open and lit. There were vehicles he didn't recognize, news vans, and a sign out front so clean and bright it looked brand new. Marcus Delaney sat in his car at the top of the rise with cooling coffee soaking into his slacks, and for the first time in his career, he felt the small, cold finger of something he didn't have a name for. He almost turned around. He should have turned around. Instead, he told himself what men like him always tell themselves, that the paperwork was the paperwork, that the law was the law, that a bunch of bikers and a coat of paint didn't change a signed seizure order. He told himself he was Marcus Delaney, and he held the deed of trust, and these people were trespassing on bank property. He straightened his tie, found a smile he didn't feel, and drove the rest of the way down. The crowd watched him come. 600 faces turned toward the car, silent, and the silence was worse than any shouting could have been. He parked at the edge of the lot, and he made himself get out leather folder under his arm, and he made his voice loud and official. "I'm looking for Ethan Walker." "You found a lot more than Ethan Walker," somebody said, and a few of the men laughed low, and Delaney's neck went hot. The crowd parted, and the old man came forward. But it wasn't the old man from the file. The file said beaten, file said quiet, file said gave up. The man walking toward Marcus Delaney through a parted sea of leather had his shoulders back and his chin level and his eyes clear. And beside him walked a big, gray-bearded man who looked like he'd never backed down from anything in his life. And behind those two came others, a sharp-dressed man with a briefcase, a younger man with a laptop, an older fellow with the unmistakable bearing of a cop. "I'm Ethan Walker," the old man said. His voice was steady as a level. "You'd be the bank." "Marcus Delaney. I represent the lion holder. He held up the folder, fell back on the script. The script never failed him. Mr. Walker, I have a court-ordered notice of seizure effective 6 a.m. this morning. This property and all structures are now bank-owned. I'm going to have to ask all these people to vacate, and I'll need you to surrender the keys. I don't want any trouble. I'm sure we can do this like Mr. Delaney. The sharp-dressed man stepped forward, and there was nothing sharp about his smile. Frank Reyes, I'm Mr. Walker's attorney. He extended a card. We've actually got a fair amount to discuss before anybody surrenders anything. Delaney's smile flickered. Mr. Walker has no attorney on record. He does now, as of about 4 hours ago. Reyes didn't lower the card. And in those 4 hours, Mr. Delaney, we've had a chance to review the entire file, the whole thing, top to bottom. And I have to tell you, I've been doing foreclosure defense for 19 years, and I have rarely seen anything this dirty. The hot feeling on Delaney's neck spread down into his chest. I don't know what you think you found, he said, and he hated that his voice came out a half step too fast. But a deed of trust is a deed of trust. He defaulted. He was notified. The timelines were followed. Everything here is legal. Was it? Reyes opened his own folder now, because here's 6 documented attempts by Mr. Walker to bring his loan current. 6, every one of them rejected. Now, you and I both know a lender has every incentive to accept payment from a delinquent borrower. So why would your bank refuse money 6 separate times? He let that sit. Unless somebody didn't want the loan to get current, somebody wanted it to fail. That's speculation. Is the appraisal speculation? The younger man turned his laptop around. Tom Bishop, I do forensic accounting. Mr. Delaney, your bank valued this property at a fraction of comparable land sales in the same quarter. Wildly low, so low it would have been laughed out of any honest review. And the appraiser who signed it has signed 11 other lowball valuations in the last 18 months. He scrolled. Every one of those 11 properties was foreclosed. Everyone was owned by someone over 60, and everyone ended up within 90 days in the hands of the same buyer, a company called Meridian Land Holdings. The blood went out of Marcus Delaney's face. I don't, he started. And here's the fun part. It was the old cop, now Hollis, and he was almost gentle about it, the way a man is gentle when he's already won, and he knows it. We've been pulling on the thread of Meridian Land Holdings all morning. Now they hide it pretty good, layers of shell companies, the usual. But you peel it back far enough, and Tom here is real good at peeling, and you find the officers. And one of those names on the Meridian paperwork, Mr. Delaney, Hollis tilted his head, is yours. The lot went dead silent. That's not, Delaney's mouth had gone to cotton. That's a different, there are a lot of people named Delaney. Same middle initial, Bishop said quietly. Same date of birth, same email domain you used on 3 of the foreclosure filings. It's you, Mr. Delaney. You flagged these people. You blocked their payments. You ordered the junk appraisals. You pushed the seizures through fast so nobody had time to fight. And then a company you have a stake in bought the land for pennies to flip it to the highway project for a fortune. Bishop closed the laptop. You weren't doing your job. You were running a scheme, and Ethan Walker here was just the next name on your list. Delaney looked around wildly. 600 faces, the cameras, there were news vans, there were journalists, and at least 3 reporters had their phones up and pointed at him, recording every word. You can't, he said. None of this is, you have no authority. None of you, you're bikers. You can't just, he's right. Logan Carter spoke for the first time, and his voice was quiet, and somehow that made everyone go still. We can't do anything. We're just a bunch of bikers. He nodded toward the road. But them they can. 2 unmarked sedans were coming down the frontage road. Hollis had made the call at 6 in the morning. He still had friends. Old friends, the kind who'd worked organized property fraud for the state attorney's office. The kind who'd been hearing rumors about a string of suspicious elderly foreclosures in the highway corridor for over a year, but had never been able to get the pieces in one place at one time. Hollis had handed them the pieces. All of them, documented, organized, time-stamped, with a forensic accountant's signature and a foreclosure attorney's analysis and the live testimony of a man who tried 6 times to pay a debt the bank wouldn't let him pay. The 2 investigators got out of the sedans. One of them, a woman in a gray blazer, walked up to Marcus Delaney and showed him a badge. Mr. Delaney, she said, we've been wanting to talk to you for about a year. I think today's the day. And Marcus Delaney, who had foreclosed on 43 people and never once felt a thing, felt 43 things all at once, and his knees nearly went out from under him, and the leather folder slipped from his arm and hit the gravel, and the seizure papers spilled out across the dirt, and nobody bent to pick them up. "I want a lawyer," he whispered. "You're going to need a good one," the investigator said. What happened over the next hour? Ethan Walker would tell and retell for the rest of his days, and he would never quite believe it had been real. The foreclosure was canceled on the spot. Reyes had the bank's regional compliance officer on the phone within 20 minutes. And once that man understood that a loan officer running a fraud ring had been recorded confessing to it in front of 3 news crews, the bank could not reverse course fast enough. The seizure was rescinded. The loan was frozen, then placed under federal review along with the other 11. And Reyes, who knew exactly how these things worked, made sure it was all in writing before anybody left the property. But here was the thing that broke Ethan Walker all over again, the thing he hadn't asked for, hadn't dreamed of, couldn't have imagined. The men had taken up a collection. In the dark hours of the morning, while some swung hammers and others rolled paint, Duke had passed a helmet through the crowd, just an old helmet, and 600 men and women, plumbers and welders and grandfathers and grown daughters, men who didn't have much and gave it anyway, had filled that helmet, and then a second one, and then a third. Some put in $20, some put in $500. One old-timer bear, the one who could barely see to ride anymore, had pressed a folded check into Duke's hand and growled, "Don't you look at the number till I'm gone." And when Duke did look, his eyes went wide and wet. They had raised enough to pay off Ethan Walker's loan. The whole thing, the debt that had been crushing him for a year, the debt that had stolen his sleep and his peace and very nearly his home. 600 strangers had erased it in a single night, $20 and $500 at a time. Logan put the envelope in Ethan's hands. The old man looked down at it. He couldn't speak. "I can't take this," he finally got out. "Logan, I can't. This is too much. These people don't have. I can't take money from. You're not taking it." Logan closed Ethan's shaking hands around the envelope exactly the way Ethan had closed Jake's hands around $37 8 hours before. "You're receiving it. There's a difference, and you taught it to us, old man. Few hours ago, you told a scared kid to keep his money and go be with his wife. You said some things matter more than a man's last dollar." His voice thickened. "Well, we were listening." Ethan Walker stood in the middle of his garage, his still safe, holding an envelope full of the kindness he'd thrown into the pond 8 hours earlier. Come back to him 1,000-fold, and he wept the way a man weeps when he has run completely out of any other way to hold it. And then he felt it, right there in his chest, in the place where the grief had lived for 11 years, in the place that had gone cold and quiet the day he buried Margaret. Hope. It came back into the old man like blood coming back into a sleeping limb, that strange tingling ache that hurts and means you're alive. He hadn't felt it in so long he'd half forgotten its name. But he knew it when it came. Hope. The simple, dangerous, world-changing thing he'd given up on. It was back. By noon, the news vans had what they needed, and the investigators had Delaney in the back of one of the sedans, and the story was already spreading. A string of elderly homeowners across the Southwest robbed of their land by a man in a suit, exposed in a single morning by an old mechanic's kindness, and 600 people who refused to let him stand alone. Logan found Ethan standing in front of Margaret's sign, looking up at the clean, bright colors. "My wife painted that," Ethan said softly. 31 years ago, I used to think when it came down that'd be the end of her. The last of her gone." He wiped his eyes. "I almost lost it today, Logan. Almost lost her all over again." "You didn't," Logan said. "You're not gonna. Not while there's 600 of us breathing." Ethan turned and looked at the man. "How do I ever thank you? Any of you, I'll spend the rest of my life, and I'll never." "You already did." Logan put a hand on his shoulder. "You thanked us 8 hours ago before you ever knew our names. That's the whole point, Ethan. That's the whole point." The old man nodded slowly. He looked out over the lot at the men loading their tools back onto their bikes at the garage, standing proud and saved in the noon sun at the highway that had come alive for one impossible night. He had walked into this day believing it would be the worst of his life. He had been so wrong. But there was one more thing coming for Ethan Walker. One more turn the kindness had taken out in the wide world, traveling farther than he could see. A phone was going to ring in a few weeks' time, And on the other end of it would be a voice he hadn't heard in nearly 10 years. A voice he'd lain awake aching for on 1,000 lonely nights. The old man didn't know it yet, standing there in the sun, but the ring in the pond was still going. The story did not stay on that dead highway. It got out into the world the way the important things always get out. First, the local news that morning, then the wire services by afternoon, then a clip of Logan Carter standing in the lot saying, "You helped one of ours, now we're helping one of ours." And that clip traveled. People who had never heard of Ethan Walker, who would never ride a motorcycle, who lived 1,000 miles from that desert, they watched it on their phones, in their kitchens, and a lot of them cried and a lot of them passed it on. And inside of a week, the whole country knew about the poor old mechanic who'd given away his last dollar's worth of hope and gotten 600 angels in return. And the strangest thing began to happen out on that frontage road. People came, not all at once. It started with one car, a family from Phoenix, who'd seen the story and just wanted to shake the old man's hand. Ethan, baffled, came out, wiping his hands, and let them, and the wife hugged him, and the husband bought an oil change he didn't need, and they left, and Ethan stood there scratching his head. Then there were 2 cars the next day, then 5. Then a steady trickle that became a steady stream, travelers who got off the interstate and drove 12 miles out of their way for no reason except to stop at the garage they'd seen on the news to meet the man, to put their own small stone in the pond. Motorcyclists especially, they came by the dozens, riders who'd heard the story through the same human chain that had summoned the 600, and they made his garage a kind of pilgrimage, a place you stopped at if you rode through that part of the country, the way you'd stop at a famous diner or a roadside cross. The phone that hadn't rung in years started ringing off the hook. The bays that had sat empty filled up. Ethan had to put a sign in the window, "Please be patient," one old man. And then he had to hire help, 2 young mechanics from the next town over, and then a third. The garage that the bank had appraised at almost nothing, the garage that was supposed to be erased into a line item by lunchtime, became the most famous little shop in the Southwest. And people drove past 3 brand new dealerships to bring their bikes to Ethan Walker. I used to lie awake at night, wondering how he'd ever pay back the men who saved him. Now he lay awake some nights just shaking his head in the dark, saying, "Maggie, would you look at this? Would you just look?" But money coming back, and customers coming back, and the garage roaring back to life, none of that was the miracle. Ethan knew the difference. He'd buried a wife. He knew what mattered and what only looked like it mattered. The miracle came 3 weeks after that night, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when the phone rang, and Ethan picked it up, wiping grease off his hands, and said, "Walker's Garage," the way he'd said it 40,000 times. And nobody answered. He could hear breathing. Somebody was there. "Hello," he said. "Walker's Garage, you there?" A long pause, and then a voice, a man's voice, low and unsteady, and something in it reached into the old man's chest and grabbed hold of his heart and squeezed. "Dad." Ethan Walker stopped breathing. The wrench slid out of his hand and clattered on the floor, and he didn't even hear it. He gripped the edge of the workbench. His knees had gone to water. He hadn't heard that word and that voice in almost 10 years. "Danny," he whispered. "Yeah," a breath that shook. "Yeah, Dad, it's me." Neither of them said anything for a moment. 10 years sat between them on the line. 10 years of silence, 10 years of a fight that had gotten too big to fix and then too old to fix and then just permanent. The way a thing becomes permanent when nobody knows how to be the first to break it. They'd buried Margaret without speaking. The boy had stood on the far side of the grave, and they hadn't looked at each other, and afterward Danny had gotten in his car and driven away, and that had been the last of it. Ethan had told himself 100 times the boy was gone for good. He'd made his peace with it the way he'd made his peace with the foreclosure, which is to say not at all, which is to say he'd just learned to carry it. "I saw it," Danny said finally. "The news, the all of it, the bikers, the banker, what you did for that kid with the Harley." His voice broke. "Somebody at work showed me the video, and I knew it was you before they even said your name, Dad. I knew it was you, because that's exactly the kind of damn fool thing you ought do. Give away your last dollar to a stranger." A wet laugh. "Mom always said you'd do it. She always said it." Ethan's face was streaming. He couldn't help it, and he didn't try. "She was right," he managed. "She was always right." A pause. "Dad, I've been sitting here for 3 days trying to figure out how to call. I picked up the phone about 40 times. I didn't know what to say." I still don't know what to say. There's so much. There's 10 years of Danny. Ethan closed his eyes. You don't have to say it. Whatever you've been carrying around, son, you can set it down. I set mine down a long time ago. I just didn't have anybody to tell. I was wrong, Danny said fast, like he had to get it out before he lost his nerve. About a lot of it, about how I left, about not being there for you after mom. I told myself, you didn't need me, that you were fine, that you'd rather be alone. And that was a lie, Dad. That was just a lie, I told myself. So I didn't have to feel bad about staying away. And then I saw you on that video standing in front of Mom's sign and he stopped. Mom would have been so proud of you. I just kept thinking that, watching it, Mom would have been so proud of you. And that was the thing that broke loose in the old man. What nothing else in 11 years had been able to touch, not the foreclosure, not the 600 riders, not the envelope of money or the cameras or the canceled debt. It was 8 words from his only son. Mom would have been so proud of you. Ethan Walker sat down right there on the floor of his garage, his back against the workbench, the phone pressed to his ear, and he cried like a much younger man, like a boy, and on the other end of the line his son was crying too. 2 men a few hundred miles apart, finally setting down a weight they'd each been carrying alone for 10 years. Come home, Ethan said, whenever you can, however you can, just come home, Danny. I don't care about the 10 years. I don't care about any of it. I just want to see your face. That's all I want. That's all I ever wanted. I'm already in the car, Dad, Danny said. I've been driving since this morning. I'm about 2 hours out. Ethan laughed and sobbed at the same time. You were going to call me from the road this whole time. I couldn't wait till I got there. I'm sorry. I couldn't wait one more minute. When Danny's car pulled into the lot 2 hours later, Ethan was standing out front under Margaret's sign, and he had been standing there for an hour and a half, and the boy, the man, 41 years old now, gray coming in at his temples, just like his father got out of the car, and the two of them stood there looking at each other across the gravel for one long held breath. And then they crossed it, and the old man held his son for the first time in 10 years, and neither of them let go for a long time. The healing didn't happen all at once. It never does. There were hard talks in the weeks after, things that had to be said and heard, old wounds that had to be cleaned out before they could close. But they did the work, both of them, because they'd both seen what waiting too long had nearly cost them. Danny started driving out every weekend. Then he started talking about moving closer. Then he just did it, packed up his life, and moved within 20 minutes of the garage. And on Saturdays, he'd come work the bays alongside his father, the two of them under a lift, passing tools, the way it should have been all along. And the family that came back to Ethan Walker did not stop with his own blood. A few months after that night, when the desert had cooled and the days had gotten short, a car Ethan didn't recognize pulled into the lot, and out of it stepped a young man he knew at once, even though he'd only seen him once on the worst night of that young man's life. Jake Morrison, healthy and whole and grinning like the sun. And out of the passenger side stepped a young woman, moving, careful, glowing alive, Sarah, the wife, who'd woken up from surgery, the one Ethan had given away everything to make sure her husband could reach. And in Sarah's arms was a baby. Mr. Walker, Jake said, and his voice was already thick, we wanted you to meet somebody. They walked over. Sarah looked up at the old man, and her eyes were full, and she said, I've heard the whole story from Jake. About 100 times, about the man who fixed our bike and gave back our last $37 and sent my husband to me. She had to stop and steady herself. You're the reason he was holding my hand when I woke up. You're the reason this little girl has a daddy. She held the baby out. Ethan took her in his big grease-scarred hands, careful as anything. The way he'd handled Margaret's sign, the way you handle the things that matter most. The baby looked up at him with enormous solemn eyes, and the old man's whole face came apart in the most tender way. Hey there, he whispered. Hey there, little one. Her name is Margaret, Sarah said softly. Ethan looked up sharply, his mouth opened. Nothing came out. Jake told me about your wife, about the sign. Sarah's voice trembled. We wanted her to carry a good name, the best name we ever heard of. She reached out and touched the old man's arm. And we were hoping, Mr. Walker, we don't have family close by, and you're the reason she's here, and we were hoping you might do us the honor of being her grandpa, her honorary grandpa, if you'd want that. Ethan Walker stood there holding a baby named after his late wife, with his estranged son standing 20 feet away in the bay, with a garage full of customers around him, that should have belonged to the bank under a hand-painted sign that should have been in a dumpster on a stretch of highway that had come alive in the night to save him. "If I'd want that," he said, and he laughed, and the tears ran straight down into his beard, and he held that baby a little closer. "Little Margaret, you hear that? Looks like you got yourself a grandpa." It became a regular thing. Jake and Sarah and little Margaret out every few weeks, and Danny there too. And often as not, Logan and Duke and a handful of the brothers would roll through, and the garage that had nearly died alone became the fullest, loudest, most alive place for 50 miles in any direction. There were Sunday cookouts in the lot. There were 100 motorcycles parked out front on a good weekend, and the smell of grilling and kids running around, an old bear in a lawn chair telling stories nobody could entirely believe, and Ethan Walker right in the middle of all of it, a man who 11 months earlier had lain down on a cot believing he had nothing left and nobody left and no tomorrow worth waking up for. On a warm evening near the end of that first year, Ethan stood out front by himself for a minute, the way he liked to do, looking up at Margaret's sign in the last of the light. Behind him he could hear all of it, his son's laugh, the baby fussing, Logan's gravel voice, telling Duke he was wrong about something, the whole warm noise of a life that had come back from the dead. "Well, Maggie," he said quietly, the way he always did, "I don't hardly know how to tell you about this past year. You wouldn't believe me if I did." But he thought standing there that she would. He thought she'd known it all along. She'd told him 1,000 times in that scolding, loving voice, "You'd give a man the shirt off your back and then apologize for it being wrinkled." And she'd never once told him to stop. Because somewhere down in her, she'd understood the thing it had taken Ethan Walker 63 years in one impossible night to finally learn. He'd thought that night on the cot that he was throwing his last hope away, giving it to a stranger and watching it ride off into the dark, gone forever, the way you lose everything else. But that's not how it works. That was the whole secret, and it had ridden up his driveway 600 strong to teach it to him. Kindness is never lost. It does not vanish into the dark the way a man fears it will. It simply travels farther than we can see, farther than we can follow, out past the edge of everything we know. And then when we have long stopped looking for it, when we have made our peace with having given it away for nothing, it turns around in the night and comes thundering home. Ethan Walker gave away his last $37 to a stranger, and it cost him everything. And it gave him back his whole life.